On October 27th, Dawn Walker smiled in her wedding dress, finally marrying the man she loved. 12 hours later, she was dead. What her new husband did over the next 4 days, while pretending to help her frantic daughter look for her, will make your stomach turn. And Dawn already knew it was coming. She trusted him with her heart, but he was tracking her every move. Before you look at her tragic wedding photos, hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now, because what happened next proves monsters are real. Dawn Walker was 52 years old, a mother of 3 daughters, a grandmother, and a woman whose presence could warm a room instantly. Living in the post-industrial town of Halifax in West Yorkshire, England, Dawn was well-loved but inherently vulnerable. She suffered from physical and psychological challenges, including epilepsy and bipolar disorder. Despite these hurdles, she met life with an infectious, stubborn optimism. Like millions of others seeking companionship in the digital age, Dawn eventually turned to online dating. It was a normal, modern decision, but it inadvertently set a countdown on her life. Through the internet, Dawn crossed paths with Thomas Nutt. To the outside world, Nutt appeared to be a physically large, attentive, and deeply caring partner. He played the part of the devoted boyfriend flawlessly. However, beneath that protective exterior lay a calculated pattern of extreme domestic abuse, coercive control, and unpredictable violence. Before Dawn ever met Nutt, his terrifying reality was well documented by those who had survived him. Nutt had previously been in a nearly decade-long relationship with a woman named Kimberly Alcock, with whom he shared 3 children. Kimberly's time with Nutt was a living nightmare, characterized by a sustained campaign of psychological control and physical savagery. She would later describe him as a real-life Jekyll and Hyde, perfectly charming and gregarious when others were watching, but instantly monstrous behind closed doors. Nutt's violence against Kimberly was explosive. During one domestic dispute over what to name their newborn child, Nutt grew furiously enraged. He brutally punched Kimberly in the face, confiscated her telephone so she could not summon emergency assistance, and locked her securely inside the house. This was far from an isolated incident. The abuse escalated until authorities intervened, placing Kimberly in a safe house and granting a strict non-molestation order that legally barred Nutt from contacting her or his own children. In a chilling twist of fate, Dawn Walker actually discovered Nutt's hidden past before it was too late. Driven by a quiet, protective intuition that often arises when fear begins to outpace denial, Dawn managed to locate and contact Kimberly Alcock. She asked Kimberly directly about the restraining orders and what Thomas Nutt was truly like when the mask slipped. Kimberly did not hold back. She explicitly detailed Nutt's violent history and gave Dawn a desperate, unambiguous warning: get out of the relationship immediately. Kimberly was so certain of Nutt's lethal trajectory that she had previously warned the Crown Prosecution Service that Nutt would one day kill someone. Tragically, leaving an abusive relationship is rarely as simple as it seems to outsiders. Statistics consistently show that the moment a victim attempts to leave is the most lethal window in the cycle of abuse. By the time the full extent of the danger manifests, the perpetrator has usually dismantled the victim's autonomy entirely. Nutt utilized isolation as his primary tactical weapon. Early in their relationship, he systematically severed Dawn's ties to her support network. He convinced her to abandon the family home she shared with her daughters and relocated her to a property on Shirley Grove and Lightcliff, a village situated just outside Halifax. Crucially, Nutt kept their new address a strict secret. He hid their location from Dawn's friends, her extended family, and even her own mother and daughters. Dawn's family quite literally did not know where she lived. This was not the privacy of an eccentric man. It was a deliberate strategy designed to enforce total dependency and eradicate any potential avenue of escape. Neighbors on Shirley Grove began to notice unsettling fractures in the couple's domestic life. Through the walls, they routinely overheard volatile arguments. They witnessed Nutt displaying intense possessiveness and sudden bursts of anger, followed immediately by an eerie, pleasant normalcy whenever he interacted with bystanders. In 2020, a neighbor accidentally walked in on Nutt actively assaulting Dawn. The police were called, and Nutt was arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced for the assault. Yet, despite the conviction, he remained under the same roof. During another violent outburst that same year, Nutt whispered a terrifying promise into Dawn's ear: "I could snap your neck in seconds." He meant every word. By October 2021, despite the domestic violence conviction, the isolation, and the explicit death threats, Thomas Nutt and Dawn Walker were engaged to be married. The wedding date was finalized for October 27th, but as the autumn days ticked closer to the ceremony, an overwhelming, suffocating dread settled over Dawn. This was not a standard case of pre-wedding nerves or cold feet. It was a dark, inescapable premonition. Dawn's youngest daughter, 18-year-old Kira Lee, had lived within the toxic environment created by Nut for as long as she could tolerate it. Kira Lee had frequently stepped in to physically protect her mother during arguments, enduring Nut's aggressive badgering in return. On one memorable occasion, Nut had tried to force a severely ill Dawn out of her sickbed to make him tea, explicitly taunting her because her daughter was watching. Eventually, the psychological warfare made the home unlivable, and Kira Lee was forced to move out, leaving her vulnerable mother more isolated than ever. In the days leading up to the ceremony, Dawn confessed to Kira Lee that she had a powerful, unshakable feeling that something profoundly terrible was going to happen to her. The fear was so acute that it spilled outside the family. On the absolute eve of her wedding, Dawn sent a desperate message to a trusted neighbor. In that message, she typed a haunting, heartbreaking question: should I run? We will never know the exact combination of fear, hope, and manipulation that kept Dawn from running that night. Perhaps she convinced herself that her terrors were merely an overreaction. Perhaps because Nut had hidden her from her family and forced her to abandon her previous life, she felt she truly had nowhere left to go. Perhaps she genuinely hoped that marriage would finally change him, or perhaps she recognized that running would trigger the very violence she feared. On the afternoon of October 27, 2021, Dawn Walker put on her white wedding dress. Family and friends gathered to witness the vows. Photographs from that day captured Dawn smiling, dancing, and laughing. For a few brief hours, the profound terror of the previous months seemed to evaporate. Dawn allowed herself to openly embrace the happiness she so deeply deserved. When the celebration concluded, Dawn and her new husband returned to their residence at Shirley Grove. Local CCTV cameras captured the final footage of Dawn Walker alive. The video showed her walking through her front door, still dressed in her wedding attire, carrying the fading joy of her wedding afternoon into the house. She would never walk back out. What occurred within the walls of Shirley Grove over the next few hours was a display of sheer, unmitigated brutality. When Thomas Nutt was eventually forced to account for Dawn's death, he spun a classic web of victim-blaming minimization. He claimed that an argument had spontaneously erupted because Dawn wanted to divorce him immediately and had threatened to ruin his life with false allegations of abuse. Nutt maintained that he never intended to hurt her, claiming he merely attempted to restrain her during a manic episode. The forensic evidence utterly demolished his lies. A meticulous post-mortem examination revealed the horrific reality of Dawn's final moments. She had sustained deep, severe bruising across her face, a fractured nose, and a heavily fractured left eye socket. Most damningly, the autopsy revealed catastrophic internal neck injuries, including a completely fractured thyroid cartilage. During the trial, the judge, His Honor Judge Jonathan Rose, spoke with absolute certainty regarding the medical evidence. A fractured thyroid cartilage does not happen by accident, nor does it happen during a frantic attempt to restrain someone. It requires sustained, intentional, and localized physical force. The forensic narrative was clear. Thomas Nutt, utilizing his massive physical size advantage, brutally beat his diminutive new bride, fracturing the bones in her face before deliberately throttling the life out of her. Dawn Walker's marriage lasted less than 12 hours. Before the sun rose on October 28, she was dead on her kitchen floor. What Thomas Nutt did in the immediate aftermath of the murder elevates this case from a terrible tragedy into a chilling study of sociopathic calculation. He did not panic, he did not weep, and he did not summon an ambulance. Instead, he calmly picked up the lifeless body of his new wife and stuffed it into a narrow kitchen cupboard. With Dawn's body hidden away, Nutt proceeded to embark on his honeymoon entirely alone. He hitched up his caravan and embarked on a multi-day drive to Skegness, a seaside resort town on the Lincolnshire coast. For several days while his wife's body lay cold in a kitchen cupboard back in Yorkshire, Nutt lived a life of leisure. He parked his caravan in a coastal lay-by, bought snacks, and spent his evenings relaxing and watching DVDs. While Nutt was away, Dawn's family began to panic. Her daughters had expected to hear from her after the wedding. Sensing the growing suspicion, Nutt used Dawn's mobile phone to send fraudulent text messages to Kira Lee, pretending to be her mother and arranging a fake meeting time. When the time came and Dawn predictably failed to appear, Nutt called Kira Lee, feigning intense panic. Upon returning to Halifax, Nutt took his deception to an almost unbelievable level of cruelty. He volunteered to help Kira Lee search the neighborhood for her missing mother. He drove the teenager around town, walked the streets with her, and comforted her, holding out hope that they would find Dawn safe. He even invited the frantic teenager back into the house on Shirley Grove, where they sat and ate lunch together. mere feet away from the cupboard where Dawn's body was hidden. To complete the illusion of a happy, normal home, Nutt then hung up festive Halloween decorations around the property. On October 31st, 4 days after the murder, Nutt finally dialed 999 to officially report his wife missing. He painted a picture of himself as a deeply worried husband, explicitly weaponizing Dawn's history of mental health struggles and epilepsy to suggest to the police that she had likely suffered a medical episode and wandered off confused. However, Nutt's timeline collapsed an hour later. The police informed him that a dispatched officer was en route to the house to take a formal statement and inspect the premises. Realizing that a physical search of the home was imminent, Nutt panicked. Neighborhood CCTV cameras captured the sequence that followed. In broad daylight, Nutt dragged a large, heavy plastic suitcase out into his back garden. Because rigor mortis had set in, Dawn's body would not fit. To overcome this, Nutt manually broke the bones in his dead wife's legs, forcing her body into the tight space. The footage showed Nutt casually wheeling the suitcase across the lawn, lifting it with brute strength, and throwing it over a boundary fence into the thick undergrowth of a neighboring field. Minutes later, the police officer arrived. Nutt calmly welcomed him inside, escorted him through the rooms, and provided detailed information regarding Dawn's medical vulnerabilities. The officer left without noticing anything out of the ordinary. The moment the police vehicle pulled away, Nutt walked back into the garden and used his bare foot to carefully sweep away the visible wheel tracks the heavy suitcase had left on the grass path. He then joined his neighbors outside, continuing the public search for his missing wife. The deception ended later that afternoon. Suspicious neighbors who had witnessed Nutt struggling with the massive suitcase earlier in the day went to investigate the undergrowth. They discovered the suitcase and immediately alerted authorities. West Yorkshire police opened the bag and found the remains of Dawn Walker. Thomas Nutt was instantly identified as the primary suspect. Realizing the net had closed, he contacted a solicitor and surrendered to a local police station. Even in custody, Nutt attempted to outsmart the investigators. He constructed an intricate, entirely fabricated itinerary of his honeymoon, claiming that Dawn had actually accompanied him to Skegness, and that they had enjoyed a lovely trip together before she vanished. He provided precise details of roads, times, and highway CCTV locations, a strategic move the prosecution later noted proved his high cognitive capacity under immense pressure. But the digital footprint proved fatal to his defense. Highway cameras along the route to Skegness showed Nutt driving entirely alone. To fool passing motorists or police, he had placed bulky items on the passenger seat to create the visual silhouette of a passenger. There was not a single frame of footage, a single witness, or a single ping of cellular data placing Dawn Walker in Skegness. The trial at Bradford Crown Court was swift and emotionally devastating. The prosecution presented a mountain of forensic evidence, the haunting CCTV footage of the suitcase, and the powerful testimonies of Dawn's family. Kimberly Alcock took the stand, courageous and resolute, telling the jury of her prior warnings. The jury required a mere 3 hours of deliberation to return a unanimous verdict: guilty of murder. On August 19, 2022, Thomas Nutt stood before Judge Jonathan Rose for sentencing. Nutt's defense team attempted to argue that their client felt deep remorse for his actions, but the judge completely rejected the claim. Judge Rose noted that Nutt had shown zero genuine remorse, choosing instead to consistently defame his dead wife's character throughout the trial in a desperate bid to excuse his own violence. The judge's final address to Nutt echoed through the courtroom: "Dawn Walker died because you are a bully. Used to getting your own way with women, used to controlling and manipulating women, and used to using your considerable size advantage to inflict violence on women if you considered it necessary." Thomas Nutt was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a strict judicial order that he must serve a minimum of 21 years before he is even eligible to be considered for parole. He will be well into his late 60s before he ever tastes freedom, and given the severity of his actions, release is far from guaranteed. For Dawn's family, the sentence offers a cold form of justice, but it can never repair the catastrophic damage left in Nutt's wake. In her victim impact statement, Kira Lee spoke of a future permanently stolen, of birthdays, milestones, and Sunday mornings that will forever be empty. The judge noted that because of Nutt's macabre actions, Dawn's grandchildren now suffer from intense, recurring nightmares. Her middle daughter cannot bear to look at a travel suitcase, and the entire family will forever harbor a deep, traumatic aversion to the arrival of Halloween. Dawn Walker is remembered not by the horrific manner of her death, but by the warmth, light, and love she gave to the world, a light that a brutal man tried but ultimately failed to entirely extinguish.